Why did she feel the storm before the alarm sounded? It came through the floor first. A low vibration. So faint most people ignored it. But Alina Rios didn't. She set her coffee down untouched as the ripple passed through the concrete, the surface trembling just enough to confirm what her body already knew. Something was shifting, not breaking yet, just leaning toward failure. The operations bay breathed like a tired animal. Consoles hummed. Screens glowed. Rain hammered the outer walls hard enough to blur the line between sound and pressure. Somewhere above them, wind scraped metal like a warning it didn't intend to repeat. Alina stepped closer to the routing board. 3 nodes faded from green to amber, slowly, almost politely. That was worse than an immediate failure. She didn't swear, didn't raise her voice. She adjusted the gain margins, logged the timestamp, and rerouted emergency traffic before anyone else noticed the change. Calm was not something she performed. It was something she practiced until it lived in her hands. Around her, people talked louder than necessary. Jokes died halfway out of mouths. Radios crackled with half-words and static. Storm lockdown had been declared an hour earlier, but the base kept pretending it was business as usual. She knew better. Alina had learned early that systems didn't collapse all at once. They gave warnings, soft ones, the kind you missed if you were busy trying to look important. At the edge of the bay, raised voices bled in from the lobby. She didn't turn yet. She already knew the sound. Captain Care had a way of speaking when he wanted everyone nearby to understand who held the authority. Each word landed sharp, precise, polished by regulation and certainty. Authority like that filled space. Competence filled silence. She tagged another anomaly when a legacy protocol blinked briefly on her auxiliary screen, gone before it fully resolved, old, buried, the kind of thing that wasn't supposed to wake up anymore. Her fingers paused. Outdated access keys didn't activate themselves. They responded to presence. She logged it anyway, unknown, unresolved. That was when the lobby noise sharpened. "You're not on the list." The sentence cut cleanly through the hum of equipment. Alina finally glanced over her shoulder. A small crowd had formed near the checkpoint. Marines, techs, officers sheltering from the rain while pretending not to watch. At the center stood an old man in a soaked leather jacket, posture relaxed, hands visible, eyes steady in a way that suggested he wasn't here to argue. Captain Care stood squared off in front of him, dress blues under a poncho, clipboard tucked like a shield. The old man didn't interrupt, didn't explain, he listened. That bothered Care more than defiance would have. Alina noticed the patch on the jacket sleeve before she noticed anything else. Not because it was bright, it wasn't, but because it was worn in a way souvenirs never were. The threads were smooth, faded by touch, not time. A talon or wing coiled into something half-forgotten. Her eyes flicked back to the status board automatically. Another node dipped. "Veterans don't walk into restricted ops just because they tell stories, sir." The words landed heavier than Care intended. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Alina's jaw tightened, though she said nothing. She had been that soldier once, the one no one looked at twice. Background, support, useful but invisible, the kind of person people only remembered when something stopped working. Her watch ticked against her wrist, old, scratched, her father's. "You don't need to shout to hold a line," he'd told her once. "You just refuse to move." The encrypted handshake pulsed again on her screen. Stronger this time. Her breath slowed. She isolated the channel, quarantined it from live traffic, and pulled the archive. The identifier was partially blacked out, classification truncating the name into something almost legible. Ghost. The rest vanished behind clearance she didn't have. Her pulse didn't spike, fear was loud, curiosity was quiet. Behind her, the storm slammed hard enough to rattle the outer doors. Somewhere on the pier, a sensor dropped entirely. Outer pier readings are unstable, a junior specialist said, voice thin. Medevac asking for updated wind shear. Elena turned fully back to her work. Lock in the last clean data set, she said evenly. Flag deviations beyond tolerance, push to me first. The kid nodded too fast, but his shoulders dropped. Calm was contagious if you applied it correctly. She rerouted priority lanes, shaving milliseconds off packet loss that might mean the difference between safe altitude and blind descent. The system protested. She overrode it anyway. Sometimes the manual was wrong. She caught movement at the lobby again. Captain Care was still pressing. The old man hadn't moved an inch closer to the inner line. But his eyes tracked the wall map the way Elena tracked failing nodes. Not sightseeing. Inventory. The legacy channel blinked again, this time holding long enough for the system to almost recognize it, like muscle memory waking up. The base wasn't being breached. It was responding. A vibration rolled through the concrete again, stronger. Then the lights died. Not flickered. Died. The operations bay froze in absolute darkness, the kind that steals sound with it, before emergency strips snapped on in red, painting every face into silhouette. Radios went dead mid-sentence, screens went black, the storm roared suddenly closer. Someone swore, someone else laughed once, sharp and scared. Elena was already moving. Manual bypass, nothing. Second bypass, still nothing. Grids down, the supervisor said too loudly. Generators didn't catch. Elena didn't answer. She opened the panel maintenance had promised to replace for years and rotated the selector with both palms. It clicked like a lock no one remembered existed. Analog came alive in a wash of static. She leaned into the mic. Medevac, this is ops. Say position if able. A fragment of coordinates bled through. She carved the voice out of the noise. Steady hands, steady breath. Behind her, Captain Care stood frozen, radio useless in his grip, scripture gone missing its next verse. And near the inner line, the old man leaned slightly toward the ceiling conduits, listening like someone hearing a familiar voice after a long silence. Those lines, he said quietly, not addressing anyone directly, used to bridge to a secondary breaker behind the east storage bay. Elena's hands paused for half a second. Not disbelief. Recognition. She didn't ask how he knew. She didn't look at Care. Gunny, she said calmly, take 2 and check behind east storage. Look for a sealed panel. Call me before you touch it. Care opened his mouth, then closed it. The gunnery sergeant nodded and disappeared into the rain. Elena returned to her board, stitching life back into systems that had never expected to be trusted without automation. Somewhere deep in the base, something old began to wake up. And for the first time that night, Elena felt certain of one thing. The storm wasn't the most dangerous thing here. Not even close. Why did the building feel like it was holding its breath? The generators should have caught by now. Everyone in the room knew it. They'd trained for it, rehearsed it, trusted it the way you trust gravity without thinking. Yet the floor stayed cold and quiet beneath Elena's boots, the red emergency lights humming like a warning rather than a solution. Static clawed at the edges of every channel. Elena leaned closer to the analog board, one hand steadying the mic, the other adjusting dials that hadn't mattered in years. Her reflection in the dark screen looked older somehow, carved by red light and responsibility. She didn't mind. Youth had never saved anyone. Attention did. Medevac ops, she said again, voice level unhurried. Give me anything you have. Partial is enough. A breath came back through the speaker, then a voice thin but alive. Holding 2 miles east, losing altitude in bursts. She closed her eyes for half a second, letting the numbers settle in her mind. She pictured the aircraft the way her father once taught her to imagine convoys on maps drawn in dust. Wind vectors. Wait. Patience. Copy, she said. Don't fight it, ride it, we'll feed you the ground. Behind her, people were talking all at once now. Questions. Orders. Fragments of authority colliding in the dark. Captain Care stood near the window, shoulders tight, radio useless, jaw set in a way that suggested anger was the only thing still responding to him. He was used to command being loud. Tonight, command was quiet. Another surge hit the building, strong enough to rattle ceiling panels. Somewhere far out on the pier, metal screamed. Alina felt it in her chest, a low pressure that pressed against her ribs and stayed there. The legacy channel pulsed again. This time it stayed. Her auxiliary screen glowed faintly as a handshake completed, slow, deliberate, like someone knocking twice and waiting to see if the house still remembered them. The identifier resolved just enough to confirm what she already suspected. This system hadn't failed. It had been waiting. She logged the time without ceremony, fingers precise despite the tremor that threatened to creep in. Not fear, something closer to awe, the kind you feel standing too close to history when it decides to lean back into the present. Rios. The supervisor's voice carried strain now. Convoy on the far pier is dead in the water. Floodgates aren't responding. If the tide surges again. I know, she said, not cutting him off, just continuing forward. Give me 5 minutes. He stared at her, measuring risk against hope. Then he nodded because in rooms like this, hope wore the shape of competence. Alina rerouted telemetry manually, rebuilding a picture of the pier from fragments and memory. Low resolution, lagging, ugly, but alive. She scribbled numbers on her notebook, translating them into tolerances the medevac pilot could trust. She didn't look back when footsteps approached from the lobby. She knew who it was by the sound alone. The old man moved like someone who had learned not to hurry even when the world demanded it. His boots made almost no noise on the tile. He stopped a respectful distance behind her, as if aware that crossing an invisible line might break something fragile. You're rebuilding it by hand, he said softly. Yes, she replied, equally quiet. Good, he said, as if confirming something he'd suspected all along. Captain Care turned sharply. Sir, you need to remain. Captain, Alina said, not raising her voice. He's not in the way. The word surprised even her. The room stilled. Care looked at her then, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time that night. Not the tech, not the background. The woman holding the line together with pencil marks and muscle memory. He swallowed whatever came next and stepped back. Outside, the storm surged again. The pier feed flickered, then steadied. Alina exhaled slowly, not in relief but in rhythm. Ops, the medevac pilot said, voice clearer now. I've got your numbers, holding. Stay with me, she answered. We'll bring you home. The gunnery sergeant burst back through the inner doors, soaked to the skin, rain streaming off his helmet. He didn't waste breath. Panels there, he said, painted over, sealed, old as hell. Alina turned fully now. Wheel. Present. Engage halfway, count of 15, then full. Captain Care took a step forward. You're authorizing a classified. I'm authorizing survival, she said, eyes never leaving the sergeant. Do it. The sergeant didn't salute, he just obeyed. The room waited. 10 seconds felt like a lifetime. Then the floor thrummed. Not the sharp whine of modern generators, but a deeper sound. Older, like something clearing its throat after a long sleep. Lights flickered. Systems blinked. Not everything, not cleanly, but enough. Floodgate indicators responded in jagged clusters. The pier feed sharpened by a fraction. The convoy's telemetry twitched, then held. A sound passed through the room, not cheering, not relief, something quieter. Gratitude maybe, or disbelief. Alina was already stitching systems together, careful not to overload what had just woken up. She spoke steadily into the mic, feeding updates to the pilot, guiding him through invisible air. Behind her, the old man watched with something like pride tempered by sorrow. "You didn't guess," she said without turning. "You remembered." "Places change," he replied. "Foundations don't." Captain Care stood apart now, posture less rigid, eyes moving differently, watching instead of commanding. The realization hurt. She could see it in the way his shoulders sagged just enough to admit he'd been wrong about something important. The door at the far end opened, and the room shifted again. The operations commander entered without announcement, Rain still clinging to his coat. He took in the scene in seconds: the red light, the manual boards, the woman at the center of it all, the old man near the line. His eyes paused, then widened just a fraction. "Status," he said. Alina answered without hesitation. Partial automation restored, manual channels stable, medevac holding, convoy still exposed but moving. He nodded once, then turned to his aide. "Pull everything on Samuel Harker, priority clearance." The console tone that followed made the room feel smaller, classified, heavy. Black bars filled the screen. Only 3 lines remained visible. Ghost Talon. Lead architect. Record sealed. No one spoke. The commander stepped forward and raised his hand in a clean, deliberate salute. He held it longer than protocol required. "Sir," he said quietly, "it's an honor." The old man inclined his head, nothing more. Captain Care looked down. The commander turned next to Alina, studied the cables, the handwritten notes, the quiet refusal to panic. "Warrant Officer Rios," he said, voice even, "keep doing exactly this." She nodded once. The storm outside began to change pitch, its fury softening into exhaustion. The medevac descended through thinning rain, guided by numbers written by hand in a notebook no one would ever archive properly. As the skids touched down, the room exhaled together. Alina logged the landing. Timestamp exact. Only then did she allow herself to feel it. Not triumph. Relief. And something else quieter still. The knowledge that sometimes the people no one notices are the ones holding everything together. And sometimes dignity doesn't announce itself. It simply acts. Why did the silence afterward feel heavier than the storm itself? It settled over the operations bay slowly, not as absence but as weight. The kind that pressed against the chest once adrenaline faded and left only consequences behind. The medevac had landed. The convoy was moving. Systems were breathing again. Yet no one rushed to speak, as if words might fracture whatever fragile balance had just been restored. Alina remained at her console, headset still on, even though the channel had gone quiet. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the board, fingers tingling, nerves buzzing now that the crisis no longer demanded everything at once. She felt emptied out and overfull at the same time. That was the danger zone. After action. After survival. She forced herself to keep scanning the screens, checking redundancies, confirming nothing was lying in wait to fail out of spite. Calm was easier when there was something concrete to fix. Behind her, boots shifted. Voices returned in cautious tones. Someone laughed once, too loudly, then stopped. Relief always made people awkward. The operations commander stepped aside, giving the room back to the work. Authority, she noticed, didn't always need to stay centered. Sometimes it was strongest when it trusted others to continue without it. Samuel Harker stood near the inner line, hands folded loosely in front of him, leather jacket still dripping rain onto the tile. No one blocked him now. No one questioned his presence. Space seemed to open around him naturally, like water parting around stone. Captain Care hovered several paces away, uncertain. The rigid confidence he'd worn earlier had cracked, revealing something rower underneath. He watched Harker the way men watch mirrors they're not ready to look into yet. Elena felt it without turning. There was unfinished business in the air. "Medevac's clear," the corpsman said softly, almost reverently. "Patients transferred, birds lifting." Elena nodded and logged it. Her handwriting was steady, even now. She took pride in that more than she ever admitted. Control, even when things went wrong. Outside, rotors thundered briefly, then faded into the distance. The storm had pulled back to a steady rain, like it had said what it came to say and was done arguing. Only then did Elena finally remove the headset. The quiet rushed in. She rubbed her eyes with the heel of her palm and leaned back, just enough to let the chair support her weight. Her shoulders ached. Her jaw hurt from clenching it for hours. She welcomed the pain. It meant she was still here. "You did good work." The voice came from her left, low, measured. She looked up at Samuel Harker for the first time without a screen between them. Up close the years showed more clearly. Weathered skin, lines carved by sun and salt and choices that didn't come with medals. His eyes, though, those were sharp, not aggressive, observant. The eyes of someone who had learned to survive by noticing what others missed. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded, as if that was all either of them needed. Captain Care cleared his throat. It was an oddly human sound. "I owe you both," he said, stepping forward at last. He didn't look at Harker right away. His gaze fixed on Elena, then dropped briefly to the floor. "I made assumptions, dangerous ones." Elena studied him, not unkindly, not forgivingly either, just honestly. "We all do," she said. "The problem is when we stop checking them." The words surprised him. She could tell by the way he flinched, then absorbed them. Harker turned slightly, giving Care his attention without judgment. That was worse than anger would have been. "I thought I was protecting the standard," Care continued, voice quieter now. "The rules, the base." "And you were," Harker said gently, "just not the whole of it." The sentence landed like a blade wrapped in cloth. Care swallowed. "Sir, when I spoke to you earlier." Harker raised a hand, not to stop him but to slow him down. "This isn't about apology," he said. "It's about memory. Bases forget, people forget, storms remind." Elena felt something loosen in her chest at that. She didn't know why exactly. Maybe because it echoed the thought she'd written in the margin of her notebook without realizing it. Silence doesn't mean absence. The operations commander returned briefly, issuing quiet instructions to aides, confirming next steps. No speeches, no congratulations. The night didn't need them. As he left again, he paused near Elena's station. "Warrant officer," he said, "your report will go straight to me." "Yes, sir." Unedited. That made her look up. He met her eyes. Some systems only improve when someone admits they survived despite them. Then he was gone. The room began to thin as personnel rotated out, exhausted Marines swapping places with fresh ones. Coffee appeared again, steaming and ordinary. The smell grounded her more than she expected. Elena began compiling logs, stitching together anomalies, manual overrides, the legacy handshake that had woken something old. She didn't editorialize. Facts spoke better when left alone. Across the room, Harker waited. He didn't rush her. He understood work like this, the kind that mattered long after the noise faded. When she finally closed the last file, she stood, joints protesting. "You're leaving," she said, more observation than question. "Yes." "They won't stop you now." "No," a pause, "they shouldn't." She hesitated, then asked the thing that had been sitting in her chest all night. "Why come back, tonight of all nights?" Harker looked toward the windows, rain streaking down like old scars. "I didn't," he said. "I was passing through. Storms reroute things, people too." She believed him, mostly. Captain Care stepped forward again, straighter now, not in rank but in resolve. "Sir," he said, "if you ever—" Harker shook his head gently. "No debts, no favors, just remember what you saw tonight." Care nodded and meant it. At the doors Harker paused, turned back to Alina. "You held the line without needing permission," he said. "That's rare." She shrugged, uncomfortable. "Someone had to." "Yes," he agreed, "and you did." Then he was gone, swallowed by rain and shadow, leaving behind only wet footprints that faded almost immediately. Alina stood there longer than she meant to. Later, when the base had fully settled and reports were filed and systems declared nominal, she returned to her workstation alone. The notebook lay open where she'd left it, pages filled with numbers, arrows, and quiet decisions. At the bottom of the final page, she added one more line. "Competence is a form of courage." She closed the book. Outside, dawn began to thin the sky, pale and tentative. The storm was over, but she knew, with the certainty earned only through nights like this, that its lesson would stay. Not all strength is loud. Not all heroes announce themselves. Some just refuse to let things fall apart. And that, she realized, was enough. Why did it feel harder to breathe once everything was over? The base was quiet in the way only exhausted places become quiet. Not peaceful, just spent. The storm had moved on, dragging its anger back toward open water, leaving behind puddles that reflected half-lit buildings and a sky still unsure of itself. Inside, systems hummed at reduced capacity, like lungs recovering after a sprint. Alina sat alone at her console, the chair turned slightly away from the board now that the urgency had loosened its grip. The red emergency glow was gone, replaced by standard lighting that made everything look ordinary again. Too ordinary. She didn't trust that feeling. She scrolled through logs she'd already reviewed twice, fingers tracing lines of data more out of habit than need. The work was done. That was the problem. When the work ended, the thoughts arrived. She replayed moments she hadn't had time to feel before. The first vibration through the floor, the legacy handshake, the way the old man's voice had slipped into the chaos without raising itself, the look on Captain Care's face when authority failed him and competence didn't. Her chest tightened. She had lived most of her career in the margins, close enough to consequences to feel them, far enough from recognition to avoid their weight. That balance had kept her safe. Tonight, it had tipped. Footsteps echoed softly behind her. She didn't turn this time either. "You should go get some rest." The voice was familiar now, Captain Care, less edge, more man. "I will," she said, "after I finish this." He glanced at the screen, then at the notebook on her desk. Handwritten, out of fashion, out of system. "You don't have to justify staying," he said quietly. "I wasn't fair earlier." She looked at him then, really looked. "I know," she replied, not unkind, not absolving, just true. He nodded, accepting the weight of it. "Command's review board will ask questions," he continued, "about the manual overrides, about the unauthorized access." "And you'll answer them," she said, "accurately." A corner of his mouth twitched. "Yes." Silence stretched between them, no longer hostile, just unfinished. "I built my career on control," Care said after a moment. "Checklists, compliance. If I followed the rules hard enough, nothing bad would happen." Alina leaned back, folding her arms loosely. "Rules don't prevent storms," she said. "They just tell you what broke." He absorbed that, eyes distant. "When I saw him," he admitted, "I saw risk, embarrassment, headlines. I didn't see history." "That happens," she said, "especially when history doesn't wear rank." Care exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he'd been carrying longer than tonight. "I'll file my statement," he said, "fully." "That matters." He hesitated, then added, "So do you." The words landed heavier than he probably intended. Recognition had weight. Alina felt it press into places she usually kept armored. He left without another word. She returned to her logs, finishing the final annotations. When she reached the legacy access record, she paused. The identifier was dormant now, folded back into the system like a memory that had said its piece and gone quiet. She didn't delete it. Some things weren't meant to disappear. Later, as shift change thinned the room even further, Alina finally stood. Her legs protested. Her back cracked softly as she stretched. She gathered her notebook and slipped it into her bag. At the exit, she stopped. The jacket patch flashed in her mind again, worn smooth by hands that had held too many nights like this. She wondered how many systems still carried ghosts of people, of choices, that only revealed themselves under pressure. Outside, the air smelled washed clean, sharp with salt and rain. Dawn edged the horizon, pale gold pushing back the last of the storm clouds. The base looked almost gentle in that light. She walked toward the barracks slowly, boots splashing through shallow puddles. Each step felt heavier now that no one needed her to be light. That was when her phone buzzed. A secure message, command channel. She stopped under an overhang and opened it. Warrant Officer RAOS. Effective immediately. You are temporarily ASSIGNED 2 Infrastructure Review and Legacy SYSTEMS Assessment. Direct REPORTING Line 2 Regional Command. No praise, no explanation. Just responsibility. She read it twice. A strange mix of pride and anxiety twisted in her chest. This was what being seen felt like. Not applause, expectation. She typed back a single word. Understood. As she slid the phone away, she caught her reflection in the darkened glass. Tired eyes, set jaw, someone older than yesterday. She thought of her father's watch ticking steadily against her wrist. Sometimes, survival wasn't about being strong enough to endure the storm. Sometimes, it was about being strong enough to be noticed afterward, and choosing to stay anyway. She stepped back into the morning, carrying the quiet weight of what came next, knowing that some foundations didn't just hold buildings up. They asked to be rebuilt. And she was ready. Why did the next storm feel closer, even though the sky was clear? Alina sensed it before she understood it, the same way she had felt the vibration through the floor hours earlier. This one wasn't weather. It didn't come with wind or rain. It arrived as expectation. By midday, the base had fully returned to its routines. Forklifts hummed along the pier. Radios clicked instead of screamed. Laughter crept back into hallways where voices had been clipped and careful only hours before. To anyone passing through, it would look like the night had been survived and filed away. Alina knew better. She sat in a borrowed office now, smaller than operations, quieter, with no red lights and no crowd to disappear into. A temporary placard had been taped to the door with her name and rank printed too neatly. Infrastructure Review, Legacy Systems Assessment. The words felt heavier than they should have. She spread schematics across the desk, some digital, some scanned from paper so old the ink had faded unevenly. Systems that predated her service. Systems that predated the software most of the base trusted blindly. Systems designed for nights when nothing else worked. Ghost systems. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. This wasn't punishment, she understood that much. It was trust, the dangerous kind, the kind that didn't ask if you were ready. Her console chimed softly, incoming call. Captain Care. She hesitated before answering, then did. Rios. Captain. A pause. I wanted you to hear this from me first. Command is circulating a preliminary report. There's disagreement. She didn't need him to finish. About the manual overrides. And about Harker. Her fingers stilled on the page. They want names, Care continued. Origins. Why certain systems responded to credentials that shouldn't exist. And you. I told them the truth, he said, that the base didn't recognize him because it had forgotten itself. She closed her eyes briefly. That won't make everyone happy. No, he agreed, but it's accurate. Another pause, less professional this time. I didn't thank you properly, he said. You don't need to. I do, he replied. Not for the storm, for what came after. She let that sit between them. Acceptance was its own form of leadership. What happens now? She asked. Care exhaled. They're reopening sealed files, legacy programs. Some people would rather keep them buried. Storms don't care what we bury, she said. A quiet sound came through the line. A laugh maybe, or relief. Exactly, he said. If they push back, I'll stand with you. She believed him. When the call ended, Alina stared at the wall longer than necessary. The silence felt different now. Not empty, watchful. Later that afternoon, an encrypted packet arrived in her queue. High clearance, redacted heavily, one name unblacked. Ghost Talon. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she walked. The pier had been partially reopened, cordoned areas marked with warning tape that fluttered lazily in the breeze. Workers moved carefully, boots crunching over gravel and debris. The water looked calm now, almost innocent. She stopped where the convoy had nearly been swallowed. It was strange how places remembered things even when people tried not to. The concrete bore faint scars where water had chewed at it. Rust lines marked where gates had strained against their limits. She crouched and ran her fingers along the edge of a control housing. Paint flaked away to reveal older metal beneath. Someone had built this expecting it to be needed. Someone who had understood failure not as an anomaly, but as an inevitability. Someone like Samuel Harker. She straightened as footsteps approached. You always come back to the edge, a voice said. She turned. The operations commander stood a few paces away, hands clasped behind his back, gaze following the waterline. Edges tell the truth, she said. He nodded. They do. They stood in silence for a moment. You've been assigned a difficult task, he said at last. Some of what you'll uncover won't sit comfortably with the present. Truth rarely does, she replied. He studied her, measuring not competence now, but resolve. Harker won't be part of this officially, he said. His record remains sealed. But not erased. No, a pause. He called this morning. That surprised her. He did. He asked if the base held, the commander said. Nothing else. And I told him it did. The commander's mouth tightened. Because of you. Alina looked back at the water. Because of what was built, she corrected. Yes, he agreed, and because you knew how to listen to it. Back in her office, she finally opened the packet. Diagrams unfolded across her screen, layered systems and redundancies never mentioned in current manuals. Notes written in a hand that favored precision over flourish. Margins filled with quiet warnings. Do not optimize this out. Silence is a feature. Some systems are meant to wait. She felt something shift inside her, a recognition deeper than curiosity. This wasn't about nostalgia or secrecy for its own sake. It was about humility. The understanding that no generation gets to decide it knows enough to dismantle what it doesn't fully understand. Hours passed unnoticed. As evening crept in, the sky outside her window darkening toward familiar gray, Alina leaned back and removed her watch. She turned it over in her hands, tracing the scratches with her thumb. Her father had trusted systems built by people he would never meet. He'd survived because someone, somewhere, had planned for failure without needing credit. She fastened the watch back on. A message blinked on her screen. Unknown sender, encrypted but simple. Foundations hold when people do. SH. Her breath caught. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Outside, clouds gathered again on the horizon, Not a storm yet, just a reminder. Alina returned to her work, hands steady, eyes clear. Because she understood something now that she hadn't before. The quiet ones weren't background. They were load-bearing. And when the next storm came, and it always did, she would be ready not to be seen, but to make sure others made it home. Sometimes that was the only victory that mattered. Why did the end feel less like closure and more like a promise? The harbor lay still beneath a sky that hadn't yet decided what it wanted to be. Gray pressed against pale blue, neither winning, neither retreating. Alina stood by the window of the infrastructure office long before her shift officially began, coffee cooling untouched on the sill. She had learned something about herself over the past 2 days. She didn't wait for storms anymore. She listened for them. The sealed files were no longer sealed, not fully. Committees had convened. Language had softened. Words like legacy risk and operational humility began appearing in memos written by people who had never worked a night like that one. It didn't matter. The work moved forward anyway, carried by hands that understood why some things were built to endure neglect. Alina's desk was crowded now. Schematics, handwritten notes, recommendations written carefully without ego. She had learned to write them that way on purpose. Anything too loud got ignored. Anything too quiet got erased. Precision survived. The base had changed its posture, subtly. Maintenance crews checked older conduits instead of assuming they were obsolete. Training modules were rewritten to include one quiet line at the end of every emergency protocol. If automation fails, trust the people who remember. Captain Care had stopped by once days later. No clipboard, no audience. He stood in the doorway like someone unsure whether he still had the right to enter. "I'm transferring," he'd said. "Voluntary?" she asked. "Yes," a pause, "necessary." They didn't dress it up. He thanked her. She accepted it. Growth didn't need ceremony. Samuel Harker never returned to the base. But he didn't disappear either. Sometimes, Alina found small things she couldn't explain away easily. A note in an archived diagram she hadn't noticed before. A margin annotation that answered a question she hadn't written yet. Once, a breaker mislabeled in the current system turned out to match an older numbering scheme exactly, one she hadn't told anyone she was studying. Ghosts didn't haunt. They guided. Late one evening, long after the offices had emptied, Alina walked the pier alone. The water moved gently now, lapping at the reinforced edges. Repairs were underway, but nothing about the place felt fragile anymore. It felt honest. She stopped where the medevac had landed. She could still hear it if she tried. The rotors, the breath in the pilot's voice when the numbers finally aligned. The moment relief had swept the room without applause. She realized then that she wasn't proud in the way movies taught people to be proud. There was no swelling music inside her chest, no urge to retell the story. What she felt instead was steadiness. Belonging. The watch on her wrist ticked, patient as ever. Her comm chimed once, a new directive. She read it slowly. Warrant Officer RAOS. Effective immediately. URASSIGNED as lead on resilience and FAILSAFE operations. Multi-installation scope. Advisory authority during emergency CONDITIONS. No congratulations. Just trust. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of it settle properly this time. Anxiety rose, sharp and familiar. Then resolve followed, quieter but stronger. She sent back her acknowledgement. Understood. As she lowered the device, she caught her reflection in the dark water below. Not a hero, not a symbol, just a woman who knew how systems broke and how people held when they did. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at her jacket. Not a storm, just weather doing what it always did. She turned back toward the base, lights steady behind her, and walked without hurry. Because some victories don't end. They continue. In quiet rooms, under unseen hands, through people who refuse to panic when everything else does. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.